Could you just briefly introduce yourself and say a bit about what your background is, how you ended up here in Wales, and how you got started as an artist?
Well, my name's Jane Whittle, and I live in mid Wales now, where I've been for about 30, just over 30 years, I think, and it's been the most productive period of my life. I started by going to art school when I left school, but it didn't last very long, and I had a big gap when I had babies and didn't do much art. I went to Chelsea Poly first, and then we moved as a family to Birmingham, where I tried very hard to pick it up again, but it wasn't easy with three young children and no car and not much money. And my husband was at work all the time, from 8 till 8 every day, and sometimes weekends. But the headmaster of Birmingham told me to go home and look after my babies. Oh. And that really knocked me. It knocked me for many years. Later on, I did other things like photography, pottery, writing, walking, poems, all sorts of things. But it wasn't until I came to Wales that I actually picked up on what I really wanted to do at the beginning, which was to do some work involved the landscape. And it was by doing a lot of long-distance walking in England, from Wiltshire to Wales, all over England and in the Himalayas, that I began to come to what I really needed to do, which I did when I got to Wales.
So roughly what period was it when you were in Birmingham that you got that knockback from the head of the art school?
That was in the 1950s, when things were very different. Yes, it was difficult for a girl to do anything, really. When I tried to get a job as a lorry driver, I was told I'd got to join the union, and when I went to talk to the union, they just laughed at me. It was transport union or something like that. That's nothing to do with art, sorry.
Oh, that's part of the story. Yeah.
Well, what I was trying to do was to paint. And that's what I was expected to do. It's what everyone else was doing. My interest had always been the landscape. But in those days, the landscape was very much out of fashion and only belonged to old ladies doing watercolours. So I was meant to paint cranes and building sites and stuff like that, which I didn't find very interesting. So the whole thing was a bit of a waste of time, really. But the only thing that was useful, which was very useful, was life drawing. And I did a lot of that. And went on doing it off and on, always, whenever I could.
In your more recent work, you've had the body in the landscape.
Yes, that was what I discovered when I was walking, especially in this part of Wales, that there's a lot of bodies in the landscape, and it was something I was a bit shy about doing. I'd done it with a collage earlier on, just ripping out the centre page of magazines and sticking them down, but I didn't show that to anybody. And I'd done other things. I was doing ceramics at that time, wall pieces and stuff like that. But anyway, when I came here, I shut myself up on my own for about 2 years. I gave myself a space to work, which is very important, and a room, a big one, with plenty of room, and started to mess about. Somebody said, it didn't go at all well at the beginning, somebody told me to play. And one of the very important things I remember was looking at the floor in this very old house, which was a slate floor, very old slate floor. And I decided to do some rubbings, because they looked a bit like landscapes and mountains and things. And I did some rubbings of this floor with paper that you buy for cooking. It wasn't, it was just sort of kitchen paper. And it really came out rather well, so I stuck it down, and then I dyed some paper and did the same thing again. And this was the beginning of a completely new way of doing things, using paper and dye in layers, like translucent layers, a bit like a watercolour, like a large watercolour. And that was a breakthrough. And that's what I went on doing while I was, for 25 years really, and exhibiting and selling. Yeah, I think this idea of allowing yourself to play is very important, and not just to take it too seriously and beat yourself doing the things you think you ought to do. You just want to do the things you enjoy doing, and that'll lead to something. And then you look at what you've done, and it tells you what to do. I found if I had an idea in my head first of what I was going to do, it never worked out the way I thought of it. So I was always disappointed and frustrated and fed up and gave up for ages. But when I just let the thing show me what it wanted, it became much better. Oh, the thing was, I never had enough money, so I didn't have any decent paper. If I'd had decent paper, I probably wouldn't have done it. But what I used was kitchen paper and wallpaper, and I made my own frames out of roofing battens, and everything I used was cheap, and that's the way I got going, really, because I couldn't afford to buy stuff. Beautiful paper, beautiful paint. I used cheap dyes that came in powder and mixed them with water to dye the paper. And that produced all kinds of lovely accidents, which were much better than anything I could produce. And this was a far better way of working than trying to produce something that I had in mind before. I just let the accidents happen and then chose them and stuck them on the picture. And with glue that was cheap, PVA, and I used to just, if it didn't work, I took it off again with water. And then if it did work, I left it there and built it up in layers. And I really enjoyed doing that. So although it was only a play to start with, I stuck with it and didn't do anything else for ages. I gave up oil paint because I used to make a pudding of oil paint, and watercolours were too small. I did a lot of drawings in charcoal. That was great because it's very easy material to use, and you can be bold with charcoal and then get rid of it quite easily with a rubber. So I did big black and white drawings of trees and stones and the beach and hills, rocks, all that kind of thing, which we've got here in Wales, all around us all the time. I was thinking about this yesterday, and I couldn't actually name anybody who'd directly influenced what I did. But I used to take magazines and go to exhibitions and looked at everything, and I don't know, it didn't go through to me properly. So I began to know quite a lot about it, but it wasn't until I actually related physically and spiritually actually to the landscape and walked it alone and felt it deeply that I knew what to do. And then when I started doing what I ended up doing, it was nothing to do with anybody else, really, although I admire people like Andy Goldsworthy and I can never remember anybody's name, the man who did The Angel, but not, and the Impressionists.
Anthony Gormley.
Thank you, Anthony Gormley, yeah. Those people who were actually out of step with their generation as well. I was certainly out of step with mine. I didn't want to do all those. I did do a bit abstract type things, but they were abstracting not from buildings, but stones and trees and things like that. It was definitely organic, and that was not fashionable in my generation at all. Yeah, I've had lots of lovely feedback actually recently. There's a man in America who used to live in Wales and saw some of my pictures online from Artworks, the gallery in Abu Dhabi where I've been selling for a few years, and he just gets in touch with the gallery every now and again and orders another one because it reminds him of his happy days when he was a young man living on a farm in Wales. And I have had a lot of wonderful feedback from people who, the people, when I had the first exhibition with all the bodies, they all sold. I was amazed, mostly to my friends, I suppose, but people did seem to like it. And that was very encouraging because up till then I'd had no confidence at all. Not really.
So the pictures with the bodies, what can you say a bit more about them? What were they about?
Well, they were sort of, you didn't see them straight away. I didn't want people to just think they were bodies. They saw a landscape. And then if they went on looking at it, they will probably begin to realise that there was a body there. So the thing with the stones and the hills and the trees, as somebody wrote about it, some gobbledygook once, but it was to do with being a bit enigmatic. The scale of the, if you look at a worn rock on the beach, it could be a huge landscape, a desert, a river from the sky, or it could be just the creeping mark of a creature that's walked across the stone, or the sea has worn it in some interesting way, and you don't know how big it is. So that is a kind of enigmatic thing, which I was trying to get in all the work. So it could be one thing or another, and you weren't quite sure.
So was that to do with looking really closely at things?
Well, you're certainly looking, seeing, yeah, looking and looking and looking. Yes, definitely. And not conceptualising too much, just seeing things. Because that's the other thing I'm out of step with, is conceptualising. And that's why it's difficult to talk about it, actually. I mean, I write, and words are a different thing. And I've tried to put words into the pictures, but it's a different part of the brain. And when I'm writing, I'm thinking in a different way. And when I'm working on the pictures, I'm seeing more and not, I don't know, it's not rhythmical. I mean, writing has got a kind of beat to it, but painting, well, pictures are not like that. It's, well, for me, they're not. They're just to do with seeing.
And a lot of your writing is very poetic, and at times you use poetry, and especially the...
Yeah, well, I did start by writing poetry before I wrote any prose. I've written poetry since I was a small child. And when I was a very small child, I thought I wanted to be a poet, and I thought that a poet was an old man with a long white beard, and I wasn't sure how I was going to manage that.
To buy a Santa costume.
But most of the poetry is visual, is a bit, and the prose is a bit visual in the end. But it's not the same bit of the brain, all the same, it's something else.
So how would you describe the relationship between the way that you produce your art in relation to the landscape and the way that you write in relation to the landscape?
It's a good question. I think I have to be in that framework. And that changes. There are times of life when I was writing haiku, I couldn't do pictures. I could use pictures to illustrate haiku. I could choose an image that was already there and stick it beside a haiku. But I couldn't produce a picture when I was in the writing mode. And when I was in the painting mode and picture making mode, I found it very difficult to write. So it was just changing a way of being, I suppose.
And yet you've, in a lot of your work, you've included words. So words have come, although they're different frames of mind, you have actually brought a lot of that together, and both in terms of...
In books, I have a bit in books. I mean, the poetry books and the walking books have had illustrations and maps and things like that. But the illustrations, I mean, graphics is not the same. I mean, doing a pen and ink drawing of a plant when you're illustrating a garden book, for me, is a completely different thing from doing a landscape picture. So it's all different. There's an awful lot of different things. And you know, when I've done sculpture as well in clay, that's another thing again. Or made funny things out of rubbish, which I've also done, and all sorts of different things. And photographs, black and white photographs I did for a long time, printed my own photographs, that until my eyes went and I couldn't focus in the camera. So that was another stage. There's an awful lot of different things. A little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Oh, that's great. How do you find inspiration and maintain your creative momentum?
Well, since I've been living here, the inspiration is around me every day, all around me. The light changes, the season changes, the view from my window changes, and I never tire of it. Now I can't use it so much because my sight is gone. So that's just something I've had to let go altogether. But while I was working here until very recently, there was never a shortage of inspiration. Earlier part of my life, when I had to live in the suburbs of Birmingham, it was just dead as a doornail, really. And when I've lived in the wrong place, when I was walking, I was getting inspiration all the time. But I was taking photographs then, because you can't really, there wasn't time to, sometimes I had a sketchbook, but I mostly took photographs and used them as reference, but that was not as good as just coming back from a long walk and immediately doing a picture. I did have masses of reference photographs, but I only used them to make sure that I wasn't sort of getting something completely wrong if I wanted it to be in a certain way, like a tree or something that you need a lot of information about, something like that. But yes, I mean, the rest of my life, it was very difficult because I didn't have anywhere to work a lot of the time. And that's what I would say to anybody else who wants to get going, is give yourself a space, even if it's one table in a spare bedroom where you don't do anything else. And so I could never work in the kitchen. Some people can, but I couldn't. And you just have to give it a priority. And when I came here, I had a big barn and there was nobody else but me. And that made all the difference, because I hadn't got a husband or children, or I didn't even know anybody when I first came. So I shut myself up and got on with it. And that was what was necessary. It was very necessary. It took me 2 years to get anywhere. It wasn't very easy the first 2 years, but eventually it happened.
How did you find, or how have you found over that time, a healthy balance between putting the time that you need into the art and the writing? I suppose I think the two together, and all the mundane demands of family and house and
yeah. Before I answer that, what I ought to say is that one of the things that was a breakthrough for me was an offer from a good friend of space for an exhibition, and that when I saw the space and the light and the windows and everything, it really inspired me to actually produce the work that I could see on those walls. So I think that kind of encouragement is very important. And it was just, I was floundering around and she said, I've got this space. It was Jean, so you can mention that if you like. Bless her. She said, I've got this space, it's too big for me, let's share it. And we had this exhibition called Elements, and I did all my bodies. And that was the breakthrough. It was a marvellous breakthrough. After that, I felt so much more confident I could go and ask for exhibitions, and we made a group. That's another thing, get together with other people, and you can get space much more easily than if you're trying to exhibit alone. And that was something I was told by Mary Lloyd-Jones, the Welsh painter, whose workshops were really encouraging. And one of the things she said was that she couldn't call herself an artist until she was nearly 70. And now she's world famous, and she's in her 90s. But what did you say just now? What was the other question? Sorry.
I can't.
Oh, the balance, life balance.
Yeah.
Well, now, because I live alone, although I have an awful lot of visitors, when I have visitors, everything gets put away. The boxes, the paints, it just goes into another room. The studio gets shut. All my writing gets stuffed in the bedroom upstairs. And I'm a granny or a great granny, or it's just quite different. Or friends, people come to stay. I don't work with other people. I can't do it in workshops. I have to do it alone. So when they've gone, I get it all out again and start again. But since I've lived here, I've been able to control that for the first time in my life.
So keeping that clear designation of art, space and time.
Yes, it's space and time. It's both those things. So space is very important, much more important than we realise, especially if you're a messy worker, which I am. I need a lot of rubbish to work with, and it takes up a lot of space, and it makes a mess. I've got a friend who comes to work who can come and work on this table perfectly well. I couldn't possibly do that. But although I can work with her, because we never talk, not really. We just get on with it, and we're quite good at criticising each other's work, but we do different things. That's Val, who we can't interview at the moment. Well, somebody I absolutely love is Paul Klee,
Right.
and I've got him on the wall over there.
All right. Yeah.
And it's something to do with the fact that when you look at his work, it's perfect. I've tried to copy them sometimes because they're very simple in some ways. But what I discover when I do copy them is that it's absolutely essential to have that black line exactly where it is, and that sort of fading browny pink colour, fading browny pink exactly where it fades. And if you get it slightly wrong, it doesn't work. And I have great admiration for him because he was also a very nice man, and most of them weren't in those days, like Picasso was a pig. But he was lovely. He actually stayed married to the same woman all his life. It shouldn't matter. He also looked after a child in the 1920s, which was completely amazing. But he has a sort of spiritual peacefulness about his mature work, which I just love. It's just, I'm not working like that at all, but I admire it a lot. Georgia O'Keeffe, I like for her gutsy kind of plants and mountains and things. There's something sort of a bit more nearer what I'm doing in her. There were lots of people I admire, and I forget all their names now.
Yeah.
It was more to do with getting to the point where I could believe in myself. There was something that the poet E. Cummins wrote about that, which I used to carry, I can't quote it now, all about art being, you've got to put it high up, list of priorities, and you mustn't listen to everybody else. You must just do what you want to do and what moves you. And I think it took me a very long time to allow myself to do what moved me rather than what moved everybody else and I was told was good. It took a long time to get around to that. But it's necessary to see other people's work. Of course, you've got to be in the world, but in the end, it's everybody's different, and they need to be who they are, not anybody else. I decided not to depend on it for earning a living very early on, because I felt that was not the compromises you have to make in order to do that would not be satisfying to me. I mean, there's a lot of people who can do both, but for me, it was going to be something that if I earn some money, it'd be great. But it's much more important to get a feedback from people than to actually sell stuff. So I'm not typical in all that way. I'm not. If somebody now is going to go into the art world, they're probably trying to earn a living. If they're just doing it for their own benefit, then I think it's very important to be true to yourself and not be over pushed by other people. Although you do have to learn, and that's practice. You just have to keep on doing it. Have a sketchbook. Use it all the time. Take photographs and look at them when you've done them. Put them on the wall. Somebody said put everything on the wall and live with it for a bit. And then you see whether it's worth leaving there or not. Because you don't know when you first do something whether it's any good or not. But if you try and live with it, you do begin to realise that some things work better than other things. But I think this confidence things of being integrity, I think, is very important. You can copy things just to learn from them, but not to be more successful. Do you know what I mean? You can learn by copying. You wonder how, if there's a picture you like, to copy it is quite useful because you find out how this person achieved that. But you don't necessarily want to work like that. You're just learning something. Well, I think that the art centre idea was because when I was a young mum, what I definitely needed was an art centre like the one we produced in the end in the redundant church in Salisbury. Because what we did there was called a community art centre in the 1970s when there was quite a lot of money to be had, Labour government and lots of good ideas going on. And it was a place where you could go with your children and do something like clay or yoga or painting or life drawing, and somebody would help you do it. And there's a coffee bar, and there were other people doing it, and it was that's why I wanted to do something like that, because there wasn't anything like that when I was young, and it was very frustrating because I couldn't really do anything because nobody was there to help me do it. And when you've got young children, you don't have any time or space to to produce your own work. But if you can join with other people who are in the same situation, you can probably share the children and give yourself a bit of time and space. And that's why I wanted to do the art. And it wasn't for my own benefit. Somebody said to me, "Why are you doing this?" And because they couldn't understand why I was working so hard at it and not actually producing any work of my own at that time particularly, except a bit of poems and photographs, but not very much. I wasn't doing pictures. And it was actually because I did believe in it. I just think it was something that we needed, especially girls, women with children. At that time, there was a lot of leisure, amazingly. And there isn't now, but there was then. And we were wondering what people, or lots of people, were going to do with the leisure. So to offer them creative activities that were cheap and easy to get to was quite a useful thing to be doing. Then it all changed later on politically and every other way. But for a while, it was all over the country. There were these little art centres starting up. And in fact, Aberystwyth was one of the first ones to be funded publicly, and we went to see it in the 1970s, and that was a great inspiration, actually, for the Salisbury thing.
Could you just to jump back a little, could you just say a little bit about the Salisbury project?
Well, the amazing thing is that when the government changed, a lot of them had to close down. But the Oxford Fire Station, which was contemporary with ours, I think that's disappeared. Salisbury has remained, much to my satisfaction, but it had to join up with the festival and the playhouse, with the theatre, in its funding, because to fund everything separately became impossible. But it's still there. It's still used as a more or less what it was intended to be used as in the moment, which at the time, which was we had some amazing children's events, which were all free, and we'd get 400 kids, and we had an elephant going through the streets and a camel, and trick cyclists, you know, what are they called? Monos, when you're on one bike, and clowns and all sorts of things, face painting. We did all sorts of extraordinary things which were possible then, are not possible now for health and safety reasons and because there isn't any money. And it's had to change. And so now it's probably only affordable to a middle-class people, whereas when we opened it up, it was, you know, a lot of things were free. And we got all these kids, and people came in large numbers to do things once they got over the idea that it was something for them and not for somebody else. Because at the beginning, everyone thought it was for somebody else. And it took quite a long time to get people in, but eventually we did. And it's still there, so that's good.
What's the name of it? It's
the Salisbury Arts Centre. I think it's called that. I don't think it's changed its name. It's in a redundant church, which used to be called St Edmund's, but it's had 3 building projects, so it's really quite well equipped now with all the things you need, with lights and, you know, a restaurant and pottery, kilns and everything. Dance floor, I think it's got as well, and proper seating. I mean, it all happened very gradually. To begin with, it was run entirely by volunteers, and we got a grant from the Southern Arts for the first 6 months to run a programme. We got £300. And we ran a complete programme for 6 months on that. And then they decided that they were going to give us a grant, but we had to get the council to agree to it, and we lived next door to them, and they thought that we had manpower services grant, which was amazing, because we employed builders. We had a plasterer and a brickie and a manager man and a secretary and a wages clerk and boys who made the tea. It was all paid for. It was just amazing, and that was our first building project. But I mean, at the very beginning, the council and a lot of people in Salisbury thought we were communists, I think, and didn't really approve, because it's quite that sort of place where they wouldn't have wanted communists in the church, or a bar for that matter. It took us, our solicitor said it would take us 10 years to get a bar in the church. It actually took us 5, I think, but we did get one eventually. Yeah, it was quite an undertaking.
You'd said something when you talked about the Salisbury Arts Centre about people thinking that it wasn't for them, it was just
Yeah.
for somebody else. Could you say a bit more about that and what you think the cause of that is and how could people overcome that?
Well, we overcame it with the help of a subsidiary a partner organisation called Five Penny Festival, which was a couple of youngsters who were really good at doing kids' events, very imaginative things, and working very hard. And I think they got grants for that sort of thing before we did, because the people who were involved at the top of the redundant church committee were inclined to do just organ recitals and stuff like that, because we had a good organ in the church, and not the sort of things that community art centre should be providing. So when we started working with Five Penny Festival and doing these free events in the school holidays, 400 kids would be dumped on our doorstep. And they were people who were working their parents were working very hard, and they were very glad to get rid of them for a bit. But we did such interesting things with them that they began to feel it was a place that they could come to as well, especially when they had a cafe. And we made a scarecrow lady to sit in the cafe, so that I made one actually, and she was called Doris. And she sat in the cafe drinking, full-size person with lots of wig on and sunglasses. And so there was always someone sitting in the cafe. They didn't think they were coming into an empty place. We did tricks like that. The builders used to throw poor Doris around a bit, but she always went back to her coffee table. And that, I think, helped to bring people in. And we got some of the children to say why they liked the place, and then we put that in the paper or on pamphlets. The business of making advertisements or flyers was not very successful, although we did do that, but we usually found them in the gutter. So we had to find better ways of getting people in. We did a demonstration walking about the town, says, come and help it happen. And that didn't really work, but then we said, what you do happens, and that did. So that was, people could come and actually do something. And they found that, I don't know, it was a subtle business. But it took time. It took time.
So if somebody, so rather than a group of people feeling that feeling of, "Ooh, this is not quite for me," if somebody feels that in themselves, what would you say to them to encourage them to give things a try?
It's a long time ago. I'm trying to remember all the things we did to get people in. It was partly word of mouth, actually, in a place like that, because it's a small city. It's a sort of market town, really, and people did talk to each other if they had a good time there. I mean, we had some very good travelling theatre groups that Southern Arts sent to us, because Southern Arts were right behind us. They really wanted us to get on, and they helped us a lot. And so they sent us things that, sometimes we had nobody in the audience at all, or people would walk out because they didn't like the swearing. I mean, and then it would all get in the paper. I think we did do things that got in the paper, and the local paper. So people got curious about what was going on. And there was a nice graveyard which you could have a picnic in. And we got a Henry Moore sculpture, which he said he's very happy for the children to climb on because they didn't wear nailed boots. They were wearing, trainers. And he came and blessed it and told the council it was okay for children to climb on it. And that was quite good, because people would be walking through the graveyard and the kids would be scrambling all over the sculpture, and then they might come in and have a cup of coffee. And we always encourage people, to come in and have a look. And they might just come and have a look, and then they might stay a bit longer. And and we had a creche too. That was a help.
So it sounds like you basically created a very welcoming kind of environment where people didn't feel they had to commit themselves to something artistic or creative, but could just come and be curious.
Yes. But I think that the step between being curious and actually doing something is quite a major one. And that did eventually happen, but not in a huge way. I mean, it certainly happened with children, of course, but because there was no problem, they enjoyed everything. We did some quite dramatic things with them, and they went home and told their parents all about it. So, you know, I think it that connection was good through the kids. Yeah. Teenagers were harder. I think we did. There was one person who was good at teenage things, who we got, I don't know, he was a community artist, we got a special salary for him or something, because we did get extra, you know, we got a resident poet. I think we got somebody who was good with getting teenagers in. And then we had a link with the drama group from the Playhouse, because they had a group of young people doing theatre, and they would sometimes come and do it in the Arts Centre, things like that helped.
So what do you think helps, what do you think can be helpful for an individual to take that final step into, from just looking to taking part?
It's two things, isn't it? One thing is joining something and doing it together, and some people find that the best way. They go to a workshop and do it with other people. And it's a lot of that is social, but it's still very creative. The other thing is if you're going to actually produce your own work and try and sell it and exhibit it, which is a slightly different thing. But my experience of that was that you had to have space and time on your own. I couldn't produce my work really in a group, but that was very personal. Some people may. They may find they can produce more that way. I think some people can, but I found that I needed to be alone to actually do anything that was going to be good enough to stick in some other place.
I suppose the combination there of working with others might help people to get started.
Yes.
But also once you want to do more personal stuff, you do need to be able to make a space, a time.
I
for
think
yourself.
so. Like Virginia Woolf said, you need a room of your own. Oh, she said, and £600 a year, that helps.
That's great. Good. Okay. Can you tell us about any when I say current projects, I'm meaning things that are out there at the moment, so, you know, books.
I've just finished a book. Before my eyes went completely, I finished a walking memoir, and I'm very glad I did, because now I can't really do either of those things, writing or picture making, because I can't see to write or read or see the work I'm producing. So it's now I garden. I try and make things for the grandchildren, or the grandchildren, and there's great-grandchildren, which are not very good at making things for, because although I think about them while I'm making them, I make rather inappropriate objects, like what are those things called that go dangly around? Mobiles that are dangerous. I've made them, and the rocking horse that scared the living daylights out of the child, so I'm not sure, but I'm very good at that. I'm making a doll's house at the moment out of papier-mâché, but I think that it'll get destroyed the first time they look at it. So, you know. I used to write poems for children when the children were small, but when they grew up, I could no longer manage it. So it's a strange business.
Are there any? Is your work on exhibition anywhere at the moment?
It's cards and books are up or in artworks in Abu Dhabi, but I'm not sending painting. I haven't sent pictures out for a long time. Well, since I lost my sight, really, about five years, I suppose, since I've tried, or a bit more, since I've sent anything out. I've accepted now that I can't. I just keep it in the barn, so it's visible what's left of it. And if anyone wants something, occasionally someone comes and buys something, but I don't advertise it or push it anymore.
How and where can people find your work and buy your books?
Oh, well, the books are online, I think, at Amazon. Some of them. I don't know if they're still there. I think they are. And the artwork is here, and it appears on the website run by Artworks in Abu Dhabi, and it's in there, but it isn't in the shop anymore. But they do say that I have it here. They give my address, and the books are there, and a few cards are there, because I did quite a lot of cards at one time.
Right, so basically by appointment type of thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, thanks very much, Jane. That's been really,
I hope it's
really,
been helpful.
really good. I mean, there's lots of material there.